Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. NATO allies have agreed to start withdrawing troops from Afghanistan on May 1st. They said all foreign troops will be pulled out from the country by September 11th. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said it is now up to Afghanistan to secure peace. Meanwhile, the US said it will look to continue funding key Afghan security forces capabilities even after withdrawal. This comes after President Joe Biden announced to end America's longest war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called Iran's announcement to begin uranium enrichment as provocative. During a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Blinken said the step raised questions about the seriousness of Tehran over the nuclear talks in Vienna. He added the remaining signatories of the 2015 nuclear deal and the U.S. should be united in rejecting Tehran's move. Kiev says Moscow will bear consequences if it crosses Ukraine's state border. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba warned Russia that the consequences of escalation in Donbass will be very painful. Meanwhile, Baltic foreign ministers are visiting Ukraine to express their support to Kiev. However, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said Ankara is not picking a side in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 138 million, while the death toll is approaching 3 million. India has registered its biggest ever single-day spike with over 200,000 fresh infections as its caseload has topped 14 million. In Pakistan, 118 more people died and over 5,400 tested positive overnight. And in the Champions League, Real Madrid have cruised into the semi-finals after holding on to a goalless second leg draw against Liverpool to complete a 3-1 aggregate win. The Spanish side will now clash with Chelsea in the Final Four. Meanwhile, Manchester City also booked their last four spot by beating Borussia Dortmund 2-1 in the second leg. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Back now, the news in detail. NATO allies have agreed to start withdrawing troops from Afghanistan on May 1st. They said all foreign troops will pull out from the country by September 11. This comes after U.S. President Joe Biden announced to end America's longest war. More in this report.
After 2 decades into the war on terror that cost the lives of 2,400 American service members and consumed an estimated $2 trillion, the United States and its allies have decided it is finally time for their troops to leave Afghanistan. Speaking alongside U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said it is now up to Afghanistan to secure peace.
This is not the end of our relationship with Afghanistan, but rather the start of a new chapter. NATO allies and partners will continue to stand with the Afghan people. But it's now for the Afghan people to build a sustainable peace.
The NATO mission comprises around 2,500 U.S. while 7,000 non-U.S. troops. UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said Britain will support an orderly pullout, whilst building up Afghanistan's capacity for self-governance and continuing counterterrorism support to protect the gains made in the war-torn country. The United States also says it will look to continue funding key Afghan security forces' capability, even after withdrawal. Earlier announcing an end to the war, President Joe Biden said it is time for U.S. troops to come home.
After consulting closely with our allies and partners, with our military leaders and intelligence personnel, with our diplomats and our development experts, with the Congress and the Vice President, as well as with Mr. Ghani and many others around the world, I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
The developments come after the Taliban said they will not participate in any future peace talks unless the foreign forces leave Afghanistan.
For more on this, we are joined by Rahimullah Yousafzai, a senior analyst from Peshawar. Sir, thank you for your time. Mr. Rahimullah, the U.S. and NATO allies have announced their pullout from Afghanistan by September 11, ending their two-decade-long war. Can this help bring the Taliban back to negotiations, who have boycotted peace talks until complete withdrawal of foreign forces?
I think the U.S. and its allies would now try to persuade the Taliban to attend the peace conference in Istanbul, which is likely to begin on 24th of April for 10 days. Taliban have already declared that they would not join or attend any peace conference, including the one in Istanbul, if there are still foreign troops in Afghanistan. That's a very tough position Taliban have taken, and they earlier had warned they will resume their attacks against the foreign forces. So, in a way, the U.S. has violated the Doha Treaty, which they signed with Taliban last year in February. They have given themselves 4 months and 1 week extra to withdraw, and it's an unconditional withdrawal. They are not asking anything more from Taliban, but in a way, I think that Taliban would have to be persuaded, satisfied, not only directly by the U.S., but also by its, those countries which are close to Taliban, like Qatar, Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran. So let's see how it goes. But right now, the situation has become very confused and uncertain.
Sir, are Afghan forces capable of handling the war-torn country's security after withdrawal of foreign forces?
If you listen to President Ashraf Ghani and his ministers, they say they are fully capable of defending the country. But if you listen to the U.S. military commander and security analysts, they say this government will not be able to survive for long. Ashraf Ghani is also on record saying that if there is no foreign military assistance for his country for 6 months, then his military will collapse. So we have these different viewpoints regarding the capabilities of the Afghan government, but there has been a lot of, casualties. 45,000 Afghan security personnel, according to Ashraf Ghani, were killed in the last 5 years. But I think that, they're still holding out. They're controlling all the major cities. They're controlling all the borders. Taliban are dominant in the rural areas, but in the urban areas where 65% of the population lives, those cities, urban areas are controlled by the Afghan government.
Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, thanks for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called Iran's announcement to begin uranium enrichment provocative. He was addressing a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Blinken said the step raised questions about the seriousness of Tehran over the nuclear talks in Vienna. He added the remaining signatories of the 2015 nuclear deal and the U.S. should be united in rejecting Tehran's move. The International Atomic Energy Agency said Iran has almost completed preparations for 60% uranium enrichment. Last week, Iran and fellow signatories held talks to restore the deal dished by the former Trump administration. Meanwhile, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei dismissed initial offers at talks to save the deal as not worth looking at. Kiev says Russia will bear consequences if it crosses Ukraine's state border. Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba says Moscow needs to know that the consequences of escalation in Donbass will be very painful. Baltic foreign ministers are visiting Ukraine to what Estonia called express their support to Kiev. The ministers of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia condemned the military escalation by Russia in eastern Ukraine. They urged Moscow to ease tensions in the region and return to negotiations. Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said Ankara is not picking a side in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Earlier, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and U.S. President Joe Biden called on Russia to pull back troops from the Ukrainian border. In Yemen, Arab coalition says it has destroyed 5 ballistic missiles and 4 explosive-laden drones launched by Houthis towards Saudi Arabia. In a statement, the coalition said all strikes attempted to target the southern Saudi city of Jazan. The coalition says some debris from the intercepted drones fell in the Jazan University and caused a limited fire. But the Houthis claim they have hit Saudi Aramco's oil facility, a Patriot anti-missile structure, and other targets in Jazan. In a tweet, Houthi spokesperson said a strike on the oil facility set it on fire. In northern Iraq, a drone has targeted the U.S. forces stationed at Erbil International Airport. The Interior Ministry of Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan government said no one was hurt in the attack. It said the drone dropped the explosive near the airport. Meanwhile, Ankara said a separate rocket attack has killed a Turkish soldier in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said one of the 3 rockets launched towards Turkish military base in the Bashika region hit its target. No group has claimed responsibility for any of the attacks so far. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 138 million, while the death toll is approaching 3 million. India has registered its biggest ever single-day spike with over 200,000 fresh infections as its caseload has topped 14 million. More on the pandemic in this report.
As the COVID-19 variants continue to wreak havoc during the latest and most devastating wave of the pandemic, the administrative and technical glitches hamper vaccination drives across many nations. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has reported about 5,800 COVID-19 infections in people who were fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, experts have warned that Brazil's P1 variant behind the deadly surge in the country is mutating in ways that could make it more dangerous.
The P1 accumulating mutations in this region can make the situation increasingly similar to the South African region and more difficult to neutralize.
The latest wave is getting worse in Europe as well. Turkey has imposed another lockdown for the first 2 weeks of Ramadan as it reported its highest daily spike in infections. Portugal has extended the state of emergency for 15 days to control the pandemic. Sweden has paused the planned rollout of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. However, France has announced to continue the jab's use. Meanwhile, the European Union has announced to procure 50 million more Pfizer vaccines in the second quarter of 2021.
And this is why I'm pleased to announce that we have reached an agreement with BioNTech Pfizer to once again speed up the delivery of vaccines. 50 million additional doses of BioNTech Pfizer vaccines will be delivered in Q2 beginning in April.
In India, the latest wave of COVID-19 has prompted a new exodus as low-paid workers are starting to flee the cities en masse just like a year ago. Meanwhile, Bangladesh has entered a week-long complete lockdown as new cases and deaths are hitting record highs.
In Pakistan, 118 more people have lost their lives to the COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the nationwide death toll has reached over 15,800. It said over 5,300 people have tested positive for the virus overnight, while the caseload has exceeded 739,000. The Health Ministry's data shows that there are currently more than 77,000 active cases in the country. The ministry says more than 646,000 people have recovered from the disease so far. Meanwhile, more than 5,100 patients are hospitalized across the country. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S. says it is ready to facilitate Lebanon and Israel in resolving their conflict on shared maritime borders. On a visit to Beirut, U.S. Undersecretary of State David Hale said border talks with Israel will have benefits for the crisis-hit Lebanese economy. After a meeting with President Michel Aoun, Hale criticized Lebanese leaders for failing to end the political dialogue. He also warned of punitive measures against those who continue to obstruct progress in Lebanon. Hale also accused Hezbollah and Iran of undermining the stability in the country. Lebanon and Israel launched maritime negotiations last year after 5 years of U.S. diplomacy, which have since stalled. In Myanmar, several people are injured after security forces opened fire on a pro-democracy protest by medical workers in the city of Mandalay. Witnesses said deaths are feared as the number of civilians killed since the February 1st coup near 750. Local media says security forces also arrested some medical workers who have been at forefront of the anti-coup campaign. Yesterday, the pro-democracy activists splashed red paint on roads and buildings to represent the blood of the killed protesters. Meanwhile, the government forces have suffered heavy casualties in an assault on ethnic Kachin forces in the north. The Kachin Independence Army has claimed killing around 100 troops during the fighting over the past 24 hours. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan has strongly criticized Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi for calling him a dictator. Erdogan said Draghi's statement was a total impertinence and disrespect. The Turkish president said Draghi has unfortunately torpedoed the bilateral ties. Erdogan added the Italian Prime Minister was appointed and not elected. He suggested Draghi lacked the democratic legitimacy to make such criticism. Draghi did not come to power in an election but was drafted in by Italy's president in February to head a new government. Last week, Draghi said Erdogan had humiliated European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during her visit to Ankara. He said it was important to be frank with dictators. Amnesty International has called for an international investigation in human rights violations in Ethiopia's Tigray region. The rights body said Eritrean forces killed 3 civilians in Tigray on the 12th of April. In a statement, it said at least 19 others were injured after Eritrean troops suddenly opened fire on people in Adwa town. It added a probe must be carried out in this and other incidents, including war crimes. Amnesty's East Africa Deputy Director Sarah Jackson said deliberate attacks on civilians are prohibited by international law. This comes more than 2 weeks after Ethiopia announced that Eritrea will withdraw its forces from Tigray. In the U.S., defense witnesses continue to testify in favor of Derek Chauvin at the George Floyd murder trial. A medical expert says he believes Floyd's death occurred from erratic heartbeats caused by his cardiac disease. Talking to the jury, Dr. David Fowler disputed findings that police restraining starved Floyd's body of oxygen. Fowler said exhaust fumes from the nearby police car may also have contributed to Floyd's death.
You would have the toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine. There is exposure to a vehicle exhaust, so potentially carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least an effect from increased carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, and paraganglionoma, or the other natural disease process that he has. So all of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
The police veteran Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to murder and manslaughter charges. Now moving on, Russia says it may resume cross-border shipment with North Korea soon. Russia's ambassador in Pyongyang, Alexander Motsegora, said there is no famine in North Korea, but life is difficult. In an interview, he said the economic strife in North Korea is bad, but not as bad as the 1990s depression. Matsugora said the resumption of the 6-party multilateral dialogue for denuclearization is not only possible, but also inevitable. He said the Russian-Chinese roadmap for a Korean settlement at its final stage provides for the launch of multilateral negotiations. This, he said, will form a regional security system with the participation of all interested parties. The Russian ambassador is one of the very few ambassadors left in North Korea. Two years following an enormous blaze, the Notre Dame Cathedral in France's capital, Paris, is going through a massive restoration process. Detail in this report.
One of the finest examples of the French Gothic architecture, the Notre Dame Cathedral, which was nearly destroyed 2 years ago in a massive blaze, is now on its way to restoration. Workers are currently busy in fixing the cathedral's vault, where once stood the long spire fell through in the building. It is being fitted with giant props, while a protective umbrella is being extended over its large opening for protection against the weather. The agency in charge of the restoration says the landmark is holding up and should be officially out of danger.
Écoutez, on a aujourd'hui des capteurs.
We have sensors since the fire, which are monitoring in real time the movements of the cathedral. It hasn't moved since the fire. It's holding up. We need to formally wait for the end of the securing stage to officially say that the cathedral is out of danger, but we see today that the building is holding up.
Till date, most of the work has been focused on the building's safety, including clearing up of toxic lead from the roof and melted spire. The restoration agency says the securing phase should last until the summer. The cathedral is set to open in 2024.
2 ans après l'incendie,
2 years following the fire, we are now ending the securing phase. This phase, which consisted in consolidating and securing the structure, will be finished this summer.
The blaze on the 15th of April 2019 destroyed the building's spire and roof, while the main bell towers and the outer walls were saved from collapsing. French President Emmanuel Macron undertook to restore the cathedral within 5 years.
While it might not seem like much, toy cars also produce many harmful emissions like the real automotive industry. To counter that, U.S. toy maker Matchbox has launched its new series of environmental-friendly cars. More in this report.
With global warming on the rise and its harmful effects becoming more apparent, sustainability has become one of the foremost issues worldwide. An environmentally concerned consumer base has forged businesses to increasingly shift towards recyclable products. Matchbox's new series of toy cars is based on real-life electric and hybrid vehicles and is a bid to make miniatures viable. Electric charging stations will also go on sale this year.
We are unveiling a concept car, just like the real car industry does. This is the Tesla Roadster car, and is the first diecast made 99% recycled materials.
The first model of the production line is a scaled-down version of the Tesla Roadster. It will be joined by toys based on cars made by Nissan, Toyota, and BMW. Matchbox says it wanted to raise awareness among children of the environmental impact of motoring.
We wanted to work with Tesla to inspire kids as the future drivers of tomorrow. We think their parents will love to see how their kids play with cars that encourage environmental consciousness, like electric cars.
The launch is part of an overhaul in Britain and Europe at Matchbox, which is a subsidiary of the U.S. toy giant Mattel. The Matchbox brand was created nearly 70 years ago and sells nearly 40 million die-cast vehicles each year.
European stocks have edged higher, with equities resuming their upward march with bond yields under control. A rally in commodity prices lifted investor sentiment, while positive earnings reports offset worries about the pace of COVID-19 vaccination. London's FTSE is leading the gains, rising nearly 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX, Pan-European Stock 600, Italy's FTSE MIB and the CAC 40 in Paris have also gained marginally. Earlier, Asian markets traded mixed, with Australian, South Korean and Japanese stocks gaining, while mainland Chinese and Hong Kong bourses slipped. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.